Hello and welcome to today's Blended Learning webinar. I'm Dr. Tendai Charles, Director of the Centre for Research in Digital Education here at the British University in Dubai, and I'll be hosting this afternoon's webinar. We're going to begin with a few words about the Centre for Research in Digital Education. Then I'll be passing the presentation to my colleague, Dr. Chris Hill, who will be defining what is and what isn't blended learning. I'll then be taking us through a 6-step process for designing our own blended learning courses. And finally, there will be a roundtable discussion with a group of digital education experts. Now, before we begin, there are a few things I'd like to say. First of all, we perceive this as a form of online professional development training. Therefore, we will be giving you attendance certificates at the end of the week. Additionally, this webinar is going to be recorded and later posted to YouTube, so you can revisit it there, or indeed you can share with your colleagues if you'd like to. Now, I think for many of you, this is probably the first time you've used Blackboard Collaborate Ultra for an online webinar, so I'm just going to take you through a few things here. First of all, the chat room is managed by two of our colleagues, Linda, Parsons, and Lisa. So they'll be answering any questions that you have during the webinar. And what I'd like you to do, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner of the page, you'll see a purple icon. If you click on this, it then opens a side panel. So it's in the side panel where you can actually type your chat comments. So feel free to say hello to everyone. Additionally, you'll notice there's a settings icon. And I think this is important because by default, you may notice names popping up on the screen as people are joining the webinar. And you may hear sounds as people are responding to the chat messages, and these can sometimes be quite distracting. So if you click on the settings icon and go down to notifications, and then disable all of the audio notifications, so at least they're not popping up during the webinar, distracting you. Okay, I think that's enough time for that. If there's any questions about that, please feel free to post them in the chat room, and one of the team will answer. Okay, so about the Centre for Research in Digital Education. We have 5 main functions here. Primarily, we conduct research on matters pertaining to technology-enhanced learning, digital education, and educational technology. We have a number of funded research projects currently underway. And if any of you, our colleagues here in the MENA region, are interested in collaborating on research projects about online teaching or blended learning, please feel free to reach out to us and we can discuss potential collaborations in future. Our centre is based within the Department of Education, and through that department, we offer a master's degree and a PhD in education with a focus on technology-enhanced learning. We also host a number of events related to digital education. We've had some excellent events so far this year and many more to come. I'm proud to say that we are leaders in the Middle East region of digital inclusion and digital accessibility. We were actually awarded a certificate by Blackboard recently for a competition we participated in. And we also design and develop and deliver a number of online courses, and you can visit our university's website to have a look at those. We have also formed several international partnerships and collaborations. So we're currently working with Lancaster University on some research. We're collaborating with Pearson on webinars and training and professional development. In fact, we have a member of Pearson joining us today. We're institutional partners with Blackboard and specifically Blackboard Ultra, which is their newest learning management system. And we're also using Coursera for Campus at the moment and discussing ways we can use that in the future for offering blended learning degree courses here at the British University in Dubai. Now, with all of that happening, we decided to actually reach out to colleagues within the region and just offer some support during these times. Since the COVID-19's happened, we've noticed that lots of small technology companies have popped up offering software and tools and training, which are all very technology focused and not really pedagogically focused or focused towards teaching as such. So we thought with our expertise of both having the research experience behind us, as well as the technical ability to implement digitally improved lessons, we thought we can help our colleagues here in the region. So I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. I'm now going to pass it over to my colleague, Dr. Chris Hill, who's going to define what is and what isn't blended learning. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much. Can everybody see the screen okay? Yes?
Well, so at the moment, it's still me. If you can just stop my slides. And yeah, there we are. Yes, we see you now, Chris, yes.
Wonderful. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you to my colleague Tendai. So I'm going to keep this very brief. The idea behind this is not to lecture you at all, but really just to provide some context for what will then be a very interactive and informative panel discussion. I want to talk a little bit about what actually we mean by blended learning. We throw these terms around a lot: blended, online, in some cases hybrid. We want to talk a little bit about what they actually mean. And for many of us, we've been using some form of online learning pre-COVID-19 and obviously entirely during COVID-19. And so often blended learning looks at conventional face-to-face with learning activities mixed in. So there's a blend of technology and a blend of face-to-face, which obviously has been impossible during the COVID-19 because of no campus life or school life. And so you'll hear these terms a lot about synchronous and asynchronous. And this is the ability to either run something live or run something at the pace that the participants can log on to. And they're all complex parts of blended learning, and we're going to go through a little bit of them in turn. Now, for many of us, particularly those of us working in the Middle East, and obviously in the UAE in particular, we've had elements of blended learning in the past. But the question with this is really for us to have a chance to reflect about the use of technology to support pedagogy, rather than technology all of a sudden being the answer to fantastic teaching, because being able to teach and being able to teach online are two separate skill sets, and they'd be able to use technology is then a third step. And so we want to look at exploring some of the challenges and opportunities and responses that our colleagues have done, and that's what we'll talk about in the panel. So we've used online learning in the past. People have used the internet, obviously, in their teaching, and we want to talk a little bit about the definitions, because the more that we can understand the nature of what we're doing, the better we can prepare. The better we can prepare, the better the student learning experience. So, with bearing that in mind, we've come up with 3 slides, and my colleague Tendai is going to put a poll up on the page. Now, there are 3 slides. Each slide is a single type of learning. So, the question for you to think about is to read the different examples on this slide and answer the poll by saying these are all examples of blended learning. None of these are examples, as in there are examples of not blended learning, or you don't know, which is a perfectly valid response. Okay, so the poll will give you the option to pick, there we are, blended, not blended, or don't know. Okay, I'll stop talking just to give you a few minutes to read, but it's one of those 3 choices. And they are all a single choice for this one page. So we've got people, okay, people are responding, that's great. And can everybody can still see the screen, yes? So you can still see the options available? Good. So we've got 6 examples here, ranging from course offered completely online, but the final exam is face-to-face at a specific time, to things like conventional face-to-face lecture-based class, where the PowerPoint slides used for lectures or course notes are put online. Those are just two of the examples. How many people have responded? About half. No, not quite. Okay. If people don't know, it's an absolutely perfectly valid answer. Okay, so there's no issue there. Tendai, how much longer should we give for this one, do you think?
Maybe just another minute maximum.
Okay, good. Good.
Yeah.
Fully online course with scheduled technology mediated synchronous communication, e.g. online chat rooms, video conferences, or web conferences. Another of the examples. Conventional face-to-face lecture-based class where all assignments and tests are completed and submitted online. Another example. How many do we have now? We've had, okay, so we've
Okay,
got,
that's more than half now.
okay.
So I'll show the, should I click show responses so they can see what the survey says?
Please do, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so almost split down the three. Okay, that's great, that's great. Now, how about this one? Same principle applies, and we will come back and tell you which one was which, okay? Same principle applies. These three are all examples of either blended, not blended, or possibly you don't know, too tough to call. Okay, so three examples of a particular type of teaching.
Chris, will you read the three examples? Because some people cannot see the slides big enough because they're doing this on their phone. So can you read the three examples?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, so the examples we've got: a conventional face-to-face lecture course in which students work collaboratively to find or construct online resources. The student work is assessed, class time or release time is allocated to this activity. That's one example. So it's conventional face-to-face, but students' work is constructed online. Second example is a conventional face-to-face course in which online discussions are enabled for students, and the discussions are assessed and participation is used as part of the student's grade. And the final example is a course in which all course materials, readings and resources are online and students meet face-to-face at predetermined times. So those are the three examples. But thank you very much for the note about reading. That's very, very helpful. And a critical point about blended and online learning. If people can't access the resources, there's kind of an issue with everybody's participation and understanding. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to click share responses now. We have more than half, I think.
Okay, wonderful. How are we doing with this one? We've got, okay, a greater number. I think it's blended. Okay, fantastic. And then for the final one, you have two examples. And again, these are both examples of a particular type. Face-to-face lecture where the lectures are put online. Students are expected to access the lectures before class, and class time is reserved for discussion of issues. And the second example is a face-to-face lecture based class that has a mandatory online tutorial as part of the curriculum, and students are expected to access the tutorial and complete an online test worth 5% of their grade. No class time is reserved or released to complete the tutorial. So it's a lot more independent than the learning. So face-to-face where lectures are online and students have to access before class and class time is reserved for discussion of issues. And then the second one, a face-to-face seminar class where it has a mandatory online tutorial. Students are expected to complete it and it's part of their assessed grade.
Okay, I'm going to click show responses now because that's more than half of the attendees.
Okay. Okay, wonderful. So we had for the first one, we had a kind of an even split of blended, not blended, and don't know. Tendai, the answers to this one are?
Not blended.
Not blended, yes. So a third of you were absolutely correct, and the rest of you were almost correct in the sense that this is a combination approach that includes some sort of face-to-face activity structured and some online activity structured. Okay, so for the second one, we had a greater number of people responded. Where is the poll gone? With.
Well, they said blended, most of them.
Okay, and were they correct?
Yes, they were.
They were, because this is a structured approach that has elements of the two, face-to-face and online, built into the course design. And so not blended tends to be where the bulk of it is, all that is structured, that is part of the curriculum, that is assessed, is done face-to-face, and materials are available online. So simply saying to students, oh, go and access the internet, does not make teaching blended, right? It has to have a coherent structure. What about the third one? what is that example? So our poll had a lot of people saying that this was blended.
Yes, most said blended for this.
Yeah, and this is one which is a little bit trickier to call. So the first example, for example, would be considered blended. The second one is going to be depending on the nature of the activity and how it's actually embedded within the teaching. And so there's no strict rule sense as in there's no rule book that you have to follow that ticks enough boxes. It's really about how you structure and how you embed activity. That can be assessment activity, it can be research activity, it can be engagement. There are many different aspects of the pedagogical approach that we can embed in the online, and that's what makes it blended. But simply saying, oh, go and read the articles online, or I've created a folder where people can access, that doesn't make it blended. That simply makes it a different way to access material and information. So thank you very much for that. We come to this question then about why blending. Now, obviously, at the moment, we're fully online, but as and when teaching goes back to quote-unquote normal, there should still be this opportunity to blend learning, not because we have to, but because it can add value to pedagogy. And so there are three generally agreed upon reasons as to why, and there's a lot of literature to back this up. It can improve learning outcomes. It can create sort of alternative pedagogical approaches. It can cater for diversity of student learning and needs. It can increase access over space and time. Again, we know that this has been very difficult under quarantine just because of everybody being home with everybody else. But it does allow people to access material at their own convenience and through their own medium, and that can be very, very helpful. And it can reduce costs. But one thing to bear in mind, that blended learning and the learning through online methods has a relatively high startup cost in the terms that the preparation of online teaching, the preparation of online material can be much greater than face-to-face. But obviously, once it's been created, the resources are there, and therefore the rollout time is considerably lower. And so and obviously, those of you who are all teachers have been facing this on a daily basis throughout the last, well, 3 or 4 months with the current teaching practice. And so that gives us an opportunity perhaps to now turn to my colleague Tendai to talk us through some of the approach about how we actually go about developing and designing material. So Tendai, if I can turn mine off and hand over to you.
Okay, thank you for that, Chris. Turn to get back to where we are in the slides. Okay, so when we talk about blended learning, I think it's really important that we need to consider what the literature says. Blended learning isn't new. Online teaching isn't new. It's been around for many years. Personally, I like to read the works of Professor Charles Graham, who's published tons of work about blended learning in the United States, both the K-12 sector and the higher education sector. But there's one definition in particular I'd like to share with you now by Horn and Staker, where they said that blended learning is the strategic combination of online and face-to-face learning with some element of student control over time, place, path, and or pace. And I've highlighted a few keywords here. So when we talk about a strategic combination, this is basically you planning ahead, thinking about which lessons during the semester you want to be taught in an online fashion, which ones will be taught face-to-face, and why. Also, in terms of student control, we're thinking about allowing the learners to study at their own pace, where they want, when they want. And we'll come to those points again later in the presentation. Now, I'm assuming that all of you are experts at in-class teaching, so I'm not going to talk about that aspect of blended learning. I'm going to focus purely on online teaching for the rest of these slides here in today's presentation. And my first comment is that I do not think we should allow technology to lead the way. As I said earlier, when COVID-19 happened, suddenly you found tons of workshops available online, tons of webinars available about how to use Zoom, how to use Microsoft Teams, how to use Google Meets, and it was all about technology. And people were forgetting about the importance of, sorry, Zubaida, could you turn off your mic for a minute, please?
Sorry?
Sorry, could you turn off your mic, just because there's a background hiss. Thank you very much. Yes, so there was a huge focus on technology and what we can do with apps, and people were sending me emails saying, Tendai, what are the top 10 apps I should be using for teaching online? And really the focus shouldn't be so much on the apps, but more about what you can do with them. When you look at things like Zoom and even what we're using here today in terms of Blackboard, they have similar features. They both allow us to teach the students in real time. They both have breakout groups where you can divide the learners into groups online. So they share similar features. What's more important to know is how can we engage the learners in activities that keep them interested in the lesson? Yeah. So I'm going to discuss 6 research-based approaches towards designing your own blended learning course. And it all starts with identifying which lessons you want to be online. So let's think now we're in July, we've got a good couple of months to prepare before September comes in. Imagine you're teaching a 12-week course in September. In week 6, you have midterm exams. In week 12, you have final exams. And you teach your lessons on Sunday and Wednesday. So there are multiple ways you can deliver your blended learning course. You can decide that for the first 5 weeks, it's going to be completely 100% online. And then after the midterm exams, then you'll go back to traditional face-to-face classroom teaching. Alternatively, you may do the opposite of that. You may start off the semester completely face-to-face in class, and then after midterm exams, you may then switch to online classes. What I know many people do is split the week. So you may have the first class of the week in class, and the second lesson is then online. Personally, I like to have the first lesson online and the second class in class, and that's because I use a flipped classroom approach. So I'm combining flipped classroom teaching with blended learning. Now, for some people, they may not want to have a 50-50% split. They may want to have more of the classes face-to-face and less online. So here's an example of a 60-40 split. So you have the entire first week is in class, and then the entire second week is online, and then the entire third week is in class, and so on. So that's one option. Or you may have a chunk. So you may have a period of classes spanning a few weeks, which are all face-to-face, and then a period where they're online. And obviously the opposite is possible as well, where it's majority online and less face-to-face. So these are all different options you can think about. I think what's important is you choose an approach which is easy for the students to follow. So have some sort of consistency during the semester, which is why I personally like to have one lesson online and one lesson face-to-face. And the students know that's going to be consistent throughout the entire semester, but it's entirely up to you. The second thing to think about is lesson planning. Now, I know for many of us in academia, many of us professors, we don't really plan lessons as such, right? We know our content, we walk into the lecture hall and we deliver, what we know. But when we're teaching in an online environment, I think it's really important to think about how we can engage the learners in the learning process. And so it's less of a lecture and more of an active learning environment. And so what I tend to do is use a task-based approach towards teaching. So I have several tasks during the session. I think about how much time I want the students to spend on each part of the lesson. I then think about the procedures they're going to be doing at each stage of the lesson. And this is particularly important when it comes to things like accreditation. Accreditation agencies want to know, okay, how are you spending your time in this online environment? I then also think about interaction, because for me, social constructivism is one of the theories my teaching is founded upon. And so I don't want the entire lesson to be me talking at the students. I believe students have chances to talk with each other and communicate together and collaborate on activities and tasks. So I try to think about how much time I'm spending talking, how much time students are spending studying alone, and how much time they're spending working collaboratively in this online environment. Then I think about the pedagogical approach I'm using at each part of the lesson. And finally, which technology I'm going to use to facilitate that part of the lesson. So you see, I didn't start with technology. That's the last thing I'm thinking about. I start off thinking about what I'm going to do and what I want the students to do during this period of learning. Okay, the next step is to start preparing your online content. Now, many of you may teach your lessons in real time in a synchronous fashion, and that's perfectly fine. Here we see a screenshot of one of my classes I was teaching last semester. And I actually teach blended learning as one of the courses on my master's degree here. So you can see my students are engaged in a discussion in the chat. I have my PowerPoint slides up there, and then you can see myself in the corner talking to the students. And that's perfectly fine. However, some of our students live in remote parts of the UAE where the Wi-Fi connection isn't particularly good. And it's a nightmare to teach those students in real time because they're constantly having connection issues. And so what I found to be more practical is to teach in an asynchronous format. So I tend to record videos now, okay? So I'll record a video, a short video about a particular topic, and then share that with my students in the learning management system. And you can really use anything to record with. I have my iPhone set up with a sort of tripod on my desk, and I just talk to it. Or sometimes I use a more professional camera as well. So that's something you should consider, whether you want to record your own videos at home. I mean, you can see the background there. This is my bedroom curtain. I think today you can see behind me my curtains in the living room, but that's perfectly fine. Students are more concerned about you and what you're teaching. You'll also notice that the screen split 50-50 between me and what would traditionally be slides. So I have text there just to help the students understand what I'm talking about and what's important for them to focus on in the video. Now, another option you have is to actually create animated videos. So I've personally been teaching in a blended format since 2014. And when I first began creating videos, I wasn't really confident enough to be in front of the camera. And so I used to create animated videos using cartoon characters. I created this one using an online software called beyond.com. And so that's something you consider as well. If, particularly I know in this region, there are some female teachers who may not want to have themselves on camera. And so you may want to consider using something like an animated representation of yourself for your instructional videos. Another option you have is to create screencasting videos. And I think that's particularly important for people teaching technical subjects like engineering or mathematics or science, etc. And there's many tools and options available for teaching in a screencaster format. So that's something else you should consider. And finally, something you can do is also embed questions within your videos to make them more interactive. One of the challenges we have with this asynchronous approach is you cannot be sure students are actually watching your videos, right? Potentially they could press play, they could be switched off, maybe they're watching Netflix or something else, they're not really focusing on your lesson. So by embedding questions within the video, that forces them to sort of pay attention and answer the question before they can move on and complete the video. And potentially you can set it up such that their answers are then sent to you in the learning management system. So here's an example of a software named PlayPosit, which you can use for embedded questions, but there's many apps out there available for doing this. And what you may also want to consider is combining between these approaches. So you may have some lessons which are taught in real time, synchronously during the semester, some lessons which are taught in an asynchronous fashion, some with pre-recorded videos, some with screencasts. You've got all these options there to play with. But it's important that you spend some time planning and thinking about how you want the students to be watching these videos. Okay, the next step is to think about designing engaging tasks and activities. Now that's a huge topic and deserves its own presentation itself. As I mentioned earlier, I believe in social constructivism. I also believe heavily in David Kolb's experiential learning cycle. And so I believe that students should be hands-on doing tasks, whether they're in class or in a virtual context. And so here's an example of an activity I gave my students where I said, I want you to find out the information about today's lecture. And then you're going to prepare a presentation and do peer teaching and teach each other the content. So it just gets them involved and gives them something to do. Other times I'll get students to create videos. This past semester, I had students work in groups and they're given an hour to do research on a particular topic. And then they've had to create a video. And they've done that separately, each student in their own home. They've recorded their own segment of the presentation, uploaded it to cloud, and one of them sort of combined the video all together into one. And that was all done within 60 to 90 minutes, which is great. Now, a key component of teaching online is formative assessment. You need to use frequent and constant concept check questions to make sure students are actually following the material. Because in a normal face-to-face context in the classroom, if a student has a question, they put their hand up, teacher, I don't understand, please help me. Now, when it's in an online environment, the research shows that students are more likely to drop out if they lose track, if they lose focus. And there's a number of reasons why this can happen, actually. When you think about online classroom, you may have issues with the audio, right? So maybe your microphone isn't particularly clear and the students can't hear you properly. Or you may have issues with the visual, right? Maybe your webcam isn't very clear and students lose concentration there. Or maybe you're teaching at a pace which is too fast for some students and they're a bit shy and embarrassed to ask you for help. So I think using constant concept check questions along the way is incredibly helpful. This is an example here, a screenshot of the gradebook I use in Blackboard Ultra. And then the final step of this 6-step process is to think carefully about how you're going to organize your learning management system. So you've seen an example of my Blackboard page already. This is an example of an online course I have where I've used Thinkific. So again, thank you to John Hinchliffe for pushing me on to Thinkific. And that's how I created this course. You can see on the left-hand panel, it's very clear for students which videos are coming next and what topics are and what's being taught. And you can embed concept questions into this formative assessment to help them understand the content. So try to make it easy for students to follow your online learning, make it intuitive. I know some people send lots of Word documents and PowerPoint slides and students get lost. So I think a VLE, a virtual learning environment, or a learning management system, LMS, can really help your learners with your blended strategy. So if there's nothing else that you take away from today's webinar, I'd say take this away with you. In order to teach successfully in an online context, you need to plan ahead. I think for many people, when we were forced into teaching online during the COVID period, many people struggled because there was a lack of planning. Right, they were forced into it, and each week they're trying to cope with creating lessons. I know many of us academics, people have children and families, and so trying to help the children study online for their classes at the same time as developing your own classes and teaching them, a lot was happening, and it's been a really difficult time. But now we have the entire summer, we've got plenty of time to prepare and plan ahead. So I'd recommend following these steps for your blended learning strategy. Now, I know for some people, they'll say, well, this sounds wonderful. Good for you, but with my particular group of students, it doesn't really work. I had a terrible experience teaching online last semester, and I don't think this is what I want to do. And what I would say is that I think many of us haven't really had the training on how to teach online, which is why maybe we're not teaching in the best way that we could do in an online environment as we do in a classroom environment. If you think about, after you graduated with your PhD, and your first semester of teaching, it wasn't really your best practice of teaching, right? But then over the years, you've improved each semester. And I find the same thing happens with teaching online. As I said earlier, my first experience of teaching in a blended format was back in 2014. If I were to show you my approach to teaching back then, it was awful, it was absolutely horrendous. But each semester, I've consistently improved step by step to get to where I am today. And so I think if you give it some time, give it a year, give it 2 years, get the training that you need, get support from people, and I think that you'll really enjoy teaching in a blended learning format. Now, the way we can help you with this, we can provide consultation in the sense of online meetings where we can give some guidance about how you can design your digital education strategy and your approach to blended learning. We can actually provide workshops and training. We know many universities, many schools have a professional development week at the start of the academic year, and we're happy to provide some training during that period. And also for people who really want the support throughout the semester and academic year on designing, developing, implementing, evaluating the blended learning strategy, we can also help with that as well. So please do reach out to us after the webinar. Okay, and I think that's enough talking from me. I'm now going to pass it on to the industry experts to share their experience. So we're going to have a virtual roundtable discussion, which I think is a new concept. Many of the webinars I've seen over the last few months have been very one-directional, right? The presenter talking to the audience, and there isn't much interaction. So what we decided to do here is have a roundtable discussion, and then after the roundtable discussion, there'll be separate breakout rooms, and you can have a Q&A and actually speak to the experts, share your experience, and get some tips and advice on how you can design your own blended learning courses. So I'll now pass it over to chair the roundtable discussion.
Excellent, thank you very much. And you can hear me okay today?
Yes, I can.
Well, and we can see the slide of all of our distinguished speakers. So thank you very much. What I'm going to do is provide a brief introduction for our speakers. You'll see 7 photos, but the top right, Chris Tuffnell, will only be joining us for the breakout rooms. So I'll be introducing the other 6. And then they'll each have sort of 5 or so minutes to talk through their experiences, their ideas, and their thoughts about particular themes, which I'll introduce. And then, as Tendai says, we'll have an opportunity for some questions. So Dr. Zubaida Shebani, affiliation of the University of Cambridge in the UK, where she graduated. She spent a few years working at the UAE University, and during that time she's developed blended learning courses for undergraduate students of linguistics. And she'll be talking particularly about how we design blended learning courses at universities. Next, John Hinchliffe, his affiliation is the Franklin Covey Middle East. He's an award-winning instructional designer from the UK and an internationally recognized leader within the learning and designing community. And he's going to be talking about a very interesting topic of resources, not courses, and particularly how approach and response should function. We'll then be joined by Karl Coutet, who's the academic director at the Arab International Schools in Saudi Arabia. He's a vice principal and then now academic director. Karl's been leading the adoption of educational technology in Saudi schools for many years, and he'll share today his thoughts and experience on this, looking particularly about data-driven digital leadership. Karl will be followed by Linda Parsons, who's an e-learning coordinator at the Deira International School. She's delivered a very interesting presentation during Tendai, my university, the British University in Dubai, a research seminar in January. And she's doing some fascinating developments with educational technology for younger learners, and so will be sharing the perspective of that aspect of teaching today in terms of digital education within the K-12 sector. Lisa Brashear is a lecturer in mathematics at the Higher Colleges of Technology. We think that she's very well possibly the most experienced member of the panel today. She's taught online whilst working in Arizona in the United States. She's currently working with Tendai on a research project about online learning and online teaching. And she'll be talking to us today about teaching mathematics and online and the associated challenges and opportunities. Following will be Pamela Johnson, who's a teacher training specialist with Pearson, and Tendai's already mentioned Pamela's association. Pamela's background is in English language teaching, but she's been providing professional development training to teachers for many years. She's a well-known leader of educational technology in the UAE, and we'll be talking about the critical topic of professional development and online assessment, which is a problem and a challenge for all of us. So I will mute my microphone. I've already turned my camera off so that we can have the speakers on as it's visible. So, Dr. Zubaida, if I could just hand over to you, please. And we very much look forward to your thoughts and experiences, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. Can you all hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Yes,
Great.
we can.
Well, from my experience of blended learning, and especially through working with people from various institutions to help them blend their own courses, I would like to say three things about blended learning. I would first like to say that any course can be blended. So any university, non-university course, any credited or non-credited course in any discipline can potentially be transformed into a blended one. So there are some people who believe that not all courses are suited for online delivery, that there may be some subjects in some areas of study that can't be taught in a blended format. So for example, I've had colleagues approach me and say things like, well, you can't really teach calculus online. Or I've had colleagues from the School of Medicine tell me, well, you can't really teach medicine, in a blended format. You kind of have to be there with the students and show them things face to face. But as we know, and as the research shows, that's not true. Blending a course is simply a matter of identifying the components or the content of a course and materials that is most suited for online delivery, and then transforming your course based on that. And there are always aspects of any course, regardless of the discipline, that can be very well suited for online delivery. So how much of your course is delivered online and how much of it is delivered face-to-face can vary a great deal from course to course. And this depends on a number of factors, including things like, for example, the type of course, whether it's a general education course or if it's a more specialized course. It also depends on the level, if it's a postgraduate course as opposed to an undergraduate level course or a lower level course. It could depend on the discipline, it could depend on your students' needs and abilities, as well as your own abilities and your confidence in teaching in a blended way. So while the percentage of how much a course can, or the percentage of online versus face-to-face instruction can vary from course to course, essentially any course can be blended and blended successfully. The second thing I'd like to say is not only can any course be blended, but anyone can blend a course. So anyone can pick up skills to create a great blended course. So you don't have to have specific background. You don't have to, have a background in educational technology or have prior experience in creating online content. You don't have to be particularly techno-savvy. I mean, I don't consider myself very high-tech. There's a lot of technology out there. Some of it might be available to you through your institutions. There's a lot of resources and tools available online. And one comment I get from colleagues and other people I know who went through the transformation process of blending their courses is that, and these are people who are initially intimidated by the technology, was that they were pleasantly surprised with how easy it was to pick up the skills and to get the hang of the new technology they were working with. So if you consider yourself low tech, that's not an issue at all. As long as you have a desire to learn, the skills can be picked up pretty quickly. So the third thing I'd like to say is, while any course can be blended and anyone can blend a course, I do want to highlight the fact that, which Dr. Tendai and Dr. Chris already mentioned, it does take quite a bit of time to set up in the beginning, so it's really important to start early. It requires a good amount of thought and planning. There's many things to consider, many options you can choose from, and Dr. Tendai did a great job of leading us through the 6-step process. So you need to identify how much of your course you want online. You need to think about lesson plans, about the method of delivery or the mode of delivery, whether you want to do it real time or you want to use screencasting or you want to record yourself. You want to think about what teaching methodology and pedagogical approach, and all of this will really depend on the factors I mentioned just a little while ago. And so all of this takes a bit of time, but the great thing is, if you start early and you set things up right early on in the beginning before you actually pilot or start teaching the course in a blended format, it can make your life as an academic much easier later on.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. So we can blend anything. We can tailor it according to content, but we must be mindful that it does naturally take a fair amount of time. So that's a very, very helpful takeaway message for all of us that are concerned about what level we can actually develop. Perhaps, John, we could maybe turn to you then to tell us a little bit more about the resources, not courses issue and how that links. Thank you, Zubaida. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Sure thing. Can you see me okay? Wonderful. Thank you very much for having me included within this. It's a great pleasure to be among you today. Now, for me, I really have a focus from having a look at academia. I was part of the team for instructional design at United Arab Emirates, but also I have a great experience with regard to organizations, so globally. But the thing that is really uniform across all of these is we are fallible as human beings. No matter who we are, what we learn, we forget. It's something that we do. And now we're in an age whereby we are now talking about such things as Zoom fatigue, which was not really a word that was discussed a few months ago. We now really need to understand, how do we transform our learning so we create it as blended in order to really meet the needs of our learners. So thinking about such things as fatigue, breaking down our learning into more manageable chunks. But one thing to really think about is, how do we provide information as refreshers to our learners without the need to create a separate course? So resources, not courses. The fact is that we forget, like I said. But when we're actually doing things as a learning process, think about it from the learner's perspective. Whilst they are listening, they are also comprehending, making notes, trying to make sense of these. But then at the same time, they are listening to you. Maybe they're looking at something on the board, comprehending, making notes. This is a cycle that keeps on happening, and things are missed. Our memory plays tricks on us. So what happens if 3 months down the line, they need the information from that they missed? This is where biotechnology has really come into its own, especially during this point. And within an organization, you could be using Collaborate, you can be using Blackboard, you could be using MS Teams in order to really utilize different modalities to provide people with resources. Now, resources are quick pieces of information that give an answer. Think Google, think YouTube. You don't go on YouTube to find an answer for something and watch for an hour. You want something quick, something easy. Think about the accessibility. The reason that you choose Uber over going for a taxi is because it's here, it's now, it gives you what you want when you need it. So think about where you place your resources, think about what resources you can curate, but also what can you curate? So think about who is going to create these. Could it be yourself? Could it be a 2-minute video that gives a piece of information that answers an FAQ? But also with the resources, be open to understanding what your learners need. Have forums, have surveys, give your people what they need, but also put it in a place where they are. If they're utilizing MS Teams, you can utilize streams on MS Teams in order to provide bite-sized chunks of information done via video so that people can go to them when they need them. So for resources, not courses, short, sharp piece of information that's very easy to find. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. That is really helpful, and it puts the learner at the front of where we should be for designing materials. So thank you very much. That's incredibly helpful. Can I now turn to Karl to talk a little bit about the data-driven digital leadership, please, Karl? Thank you very much, John. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yes, Dan. Yes.
Super. But you can't see me. Yeah. And I think you can see me now. Great. So yeah, I wanted to just make a few points from the perspective of a school leader, because as school leaders we have to make the decisions to go with certain strategies, certain tools to use. From the first step, we have to be honest with ourselves about where we are, because we always thought in schools that we were doing digital learning from a long time ago, from over half a decade ago. And even in my own schools, when we're observing our lessons, one of the focuses that we're focusing on is the digital learning environment. And we learnt, a few years ago, that digital learning isn't just having an interactive whiteboard in the room. It's more than that. It's students collaborating, developing original pieces of research. However, that was a blended learning. It was just icing on the cake. Especially in all of the schools I've been in for the last decade, when we do any form of digital learning, it's not a core part of the course. But like I say, it's icing on the cake. And what that means is, when we come to look at new situations, we have to be careful of how we can overgeneralize our learnings from what we've had before. So going into COVID, for example, we discovered that we know more than we thought we did. For example, before COVID happened and we were told to shut schools tomorrow and to plan for online learning in 2 days' time. Before that, we thought that we had no experience with online learning, but then lo and behold, we discovered that actually many of our teachers had been teaching online for example, students who were preparing for IGCSE exams or A-level exams, and so there was some experience there, and it gave us some potential that we had in our teams. But like I say, it's important to take what we learned there and not overgeneralize it again as we plan for the next semester. When schools closed, we had a day or perhaps 2 days to come up with a strategy of how we're going to teach our students online. And our main choice, or at least in my school anyway, for my team, our main focus when we're selecting, for example, an online tool, and I know Dr. Tendai mentioned about not focusing on the tool, but as a leadership team, it is a choice that has to be made. Which tool do you use? Is it Zoom? Is it Teams? Is it Blackboard? Our focus at that time, because it's pandemic time, it's a crisis, was which tool teachers implement immediately and next Students, I wasn't too concerned about. Students will get to know any tool you give them, especially the young learners, they'll get to know it. But for teachers of different backgrounds, different levels of experience, it can take time to learn a tool. So that was our focus. So, you know, we had a number of assessments for how well that was going, observations, parental feedback, student feedback, peer observations from the team themselves and observations of ourselves as leaders. And of course, that gives us some data of how well our approach was during crisis time, and gives us some information for how to plan for the next steps. But we have to consider that those next steps that come are a completely different context, and not a completely different context, but there are some parallels, and to be careful with how we transfer those parallels to the new context. Of course, like I said, before COVID, we didn't have blended learning at all. It was icing on the cake. COVID, it became the cake. It was all online learning, so not blended at all. Now we're going into a new era for schools where the likelihood is that we are going to be going for a blended learning approach. And you'll always be surprised, you can be surprised with where best practice can come from. I recall when we were looking at who was actually implementing a blended learning approach and who was implementing a flipped learning approach before the COVID measures came, you would be surprised that it was in our PE team, physical education. Whereas previously, no one expected really physical education to be the ones to drive digital learning, but they were actually the ones that were taking a flipped learning approach in the sense that prior to the lesson, students were learning about the particular skill that they would be, well, say in the classroom, on the pitch, when they came to school. So if it was dribbling, if it was say soccer for our American English-speaking colleagues, but as we call it in Britain, football, they'd be learning about dribbling online before they come into the classroom, implementing it on the field, in the class in a sense, and then after it, following up with some activities online again at the end of the session. So using that data, of course, we can borrow some best practices from our PE teachers and share it with our English, our science, our maths teachers as well. Another point that I wanted to just highlight on with that using data is that we had a very strong use of data in terms of monitoring effects of our training programs, because the new paradigm of everything being online during COVID meant that we had to develop approaches very quickly, do training in different ways, peer observations that are online, mentor observations that are online, workshops that are online. And how do you measure the impact of that? So we also developed a observation tool for use online, and that gives us a nice insight of where when we did the peer observation, what was its impact by looking at the results of our observation tool. All data which can be used to feed how you decide which approach you take. Of course, Dr. Tendai mentioned those 6 approaches, using data to decide which of the approaches work for you, work in your context, and work in the future context that's to come, and making it relevant for you.
Thank you. That's fantastic. And it raises, I think, a very, very important issue that we need to be reflective. Because, as you said, there's a lot of practice that was going on pre-COVID. And so we need to be aware, we need to be very honest of what was actually taking place. And then, as you mentioned, put in places where we can monitor for teacher capability, training and development along the way, because it's important. I think if we miss this and just go back, we'll have lost the chance to be reflective about pedagogy and teaching learning. So I think that's a very vital issue. Thank you very much. Could we turn now to Linda, please, to carry on the debate, but now perhaps with more of a focus, obviously, on the younger group of students. Thank you. Thank you very much, Karl.
I hope you can hear me okay. My name's Linda Parsons, and I feel like I'm probably the least qualified person here. Like all I'm is a teacher. But my background is science. I'm a science teacher with a specialism in biology. However, we also, well, I also am the digital lead in our school. So my school is a K-12 school, but I specialise in the secondary area. And even before COVID, we had quite a big push on establishing what our digital strategy was. And this was all encompassing. This was with teacher CPD, with hardware, with student kind of hardware and what they are expected to bring in as their devices for learning, with digital citizenship, how they should act online, and finally with what is commonly called edtech. So what platform do we want to focus on, and why do you want to focus on it? The reason why I'm going to start right at the beginning of our year was because we found that, of course, like every other school in the world at the moment, there's such a big push for digital online education. There's such a big push for edtech within the classroom. But as Karl has also said, just because you have a digital whiteboard in your classroom, just because your child is holding an iPad, does not mean that you are teaching online. It does not mean that they are learning, online. And we kind of had a big push on the skills, and we focused on not so much they are now going to be using Socrative or they are now going to be using Teams. It was more, they are using Teams for this skill of communication and organization. So we very much focused our students' learning based on the skills that we wanted to teach them, the future skills that we wanted to teach them, in order to prepare them for further education, because that is essentially the vision of our whole school, to empower the learners in order to learn, in order to take those skills to learn lifelong. So halfway through the year, I did the talk with Dr. Tendai on about kind of the 5 skills that we teach our students, being digital organization, kind of cloud-based organization, how we teach our students, how we teach our teachers to organize themselves online. I'm sure you, like me, have a Google cloud somewhere, or a cloud that's full of 30 billion photos which you never look at again. And that's what we're trying to teach our children. It's a skill of okay, well, you're taking this photo, do you know where to put it? Do you know where to put it that's most effective to your learning? If you're taking a photo of the teacher's whiteboard, you've just made that physical teaching now online. So do you know how to blend that learning yourself? The skill of effective collaboration is also something that's so important, and actually something that is our second skill, that we teach implicitly in every class, because we teach it in physical classrooms. We always want our children to learn, with other learners. It helps them learn, it reinforces skills and so on. The art of doing that, or the science of doing that, I guess, online is just as important as doing it, if not more so than doing it physically, because it's the feeling of isolation that the students might get. If you're teaching them 100% online, or if there is a blended element, they might feel isolated and unable to speak out to the teachers. They don't want to draw attention to themselves. In order to make that skill of collaboration and make it okay, and make the digital classroom a safe space for them to ask questions, you need to kind of foster that relationship and foster those kinds of skills into whatever online material that you may give them, whether synchronous or asynchronous. A good way that we have done this is by making breakout rooms. We use Teams, but I know that you can do this in Microsoft, in Google Classrooms, and also in Blackboard, which we're going to be doing later. So things like breakout rooms are so important for the children to have a space where they don't have to talk and shout out in the whole class, but it's somewhere where they can go. Also things like live collaborated documents. How do they write within a live document without writing over someone else's, without having that skill of so they can collaborate on a live document, and it can be a true collaboration project. So application of things like future skills and enhanced communication is all about the inclusivity of our learning. Now, I would like to take this opportunity now to say, yes, we have done online learning now, just like everyone else, from term 3 all of a sudden, all the way up to now, the end of our year is tomorrow. And we found that the way that the students communicate now and the things that they found out online is now a lot more formal, and that formalization, like, you know, their ability to judge themselves now and like kind of like say, okay, like if I was talking to a teacher in real life, I would use this kind of formal speak. At the beginning of online learning, we found it was really important to underline that they had to do that as well online, because they slipped back onto colloquialisms, onto things, because they found that online talking was done very informally in their own lives. So therefore, when they talked online in the classrooms, it became really normal. So we had to kind of implicitly teach that every single subject. What kind of standards do we expect of them? And finally is digital citizenship, and it goes into well-being as well. And this is for the teachers and for the students. The amount of time that you spend online doing different tasks is huge in this term, and going to be so in the years to come. If we do it properly, the amount of time that we have online and like the whole concept of like keeping yourself well online, it could be made more effective for each subject if there were sections or if there are tasks that they can be doing offline and somewhere else, and then evidencing their work by taking photos, using things like Office Lens, by using Flipgrid and Wit, by using, you know, just plain videos. And this may then filter into how teachers will then start assessing the students in kind of like a more effective way. With that, parallel to that is teacher workload and teacher burnout. Making online lessons, being online all the time, live streaming, and especially pre-recording videos, we found very quick takes up so much of your time. I used to say to my teachers, because they were very kind of, they don't like to see their faces online, they don't like to hear their voices online and stuff, and there is that kind of embarrassment, I guess it's shyness, because you suddenly become very aware that everyone's looking at every single part. It's not the same as being live just in a room. And I used to say to them, like, please go online and please do it as synchronous as possible if you want to do a lecture style thing, because by doing a pre-recorded message, there's 4 minutes around about editing time per minute of live, which can be, schools need to be thinking about that. So that's what I've been doing for the last year. That's been helpful to people.
Absolutely, thank you. I mean, and it raises some very, I suppose, fundamental issues that we should be thinking about, which is the ethics and code of conduct of online participation. So getting people used to the language that's used, the format, the means of instruction, because it's not simply replacing, it's learning a new way of doing things. And I think you followed up on a point that John had made about where you place material and how people access it, and really making sure that the learner is at the center of all of our material. So I think that's very, very useful, and thank you very much indeed. Can we turn now to Lisa, please, who is already, up on it. So thank you very much, Lisa.
All right. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? And can you see my screen? All right, so there we go. So good afternoon. How's everyone doing, by the way? Because we've been here for an hour, and I'm assuming your attention span is decreasing, right? Anyway, I'm the industry expert in teaching mathematics online. So my name is Lisa Brashear, and here's some background information on me. But today I'm going to focus and share my experiences of teaching mathematics online. So I've really done it all, from face-to-face to completely online, and everything in between. So yeah, I guess that's why Dr. Tendai said that I'm here with the most experience. I think to successfully teach online, it's all about having the right technology. For instance, for me, it's important to be able to share my screen and to have a touch screen. Teaching mathematics without having a touch screen seems really difficult. In the meantime, I'm checking the chat on my second screen right here. There we go. Yeah, so I see your activity happening on the screen next to me. Then I've got the presentation here on the screen that I'm sharing with you. And then obviously being able to write on the screen just makes it easier, excuse me. And then to help my students understand mathematics better, I use mathematics educational technology like GeoGebra, Texas Instrument, apps like PhotoMath, and then games like Kahoot and such. Of course, Blackboard Learn, Collaborate, let's see, My Labs Plus from Pearson, and then Alex and Connect from McGraw-Hill helps being able to assign work to students. And then that goes right into the accountability. So when I real life online lessons, I always check in with students. I check their work. I assign them work while they are online. And then I check up on them to see, you know, are you guys actually doing the work? At what rate are you finishing questions online? I also do breakout sessions and give them collaboration or group tasks. And then I check in with them in their specific groups. But then I also let them present something at the end so that they know it's not just something that they do with a group of 4. No, they have to present their work at the end. And then, of course, for the offline sessions, I use deadlines, and I'm strict with the deadline. So there's nothing they can do once they've passed the deadline. They know there's nothing. I blame it on the system. You know, I can't reopen the assignment anymore for you. Sorry, you had enough time, kind of thing. And then, of course, their grades and their attendance depends on the level of their participation. And then educational videos, I think, is really important in this teaching mathematics online. I've been making my own videos since 2004 to help design online curriculum. And this is a picture of me and my late grandfather, who inspired me with his video productions. Bless his soul. I inherited his passion for creating videos. So thank you, Opa. Right now, there's 16 campuses in the UAE that watch my videos, and I use Camtasia mostly to make my videos. They're on YouTube as well, but I kind of enlist them, you know, to make them just only for my students. We embed them in BBLearn right now. That's the system that we're using right now. Let's see, the assessments. I think a lot of us are struggling with assessments, right? Assessments in blended learning. What does that look like? We right now are using online facial recognition software through BBLearn, and it seems to be working really well. At first, our female students were not so happy with the fact that they had to show their face, so then they have to put their abaya on, and so, you know, we needed to kind of push them in that direction, like, sorry, but you have to have your camera on. And then what I prefer for blended learning, what I prefer is obviously after COVID-19, hopefully we can have testing centers again at the University of Phoenix and Central Arizona College. The testing centers were very successful. So we give the students a time frame of, you know, you have 1 week to complete this assignment or this test, and then they schedule an appointment at the testing center and take it there. Yeah, so the testing center, I really enjoyed having a testing center, so I didn't have to worry about watching their videos of their tests. Anyway, that's pretty much it for me. I hope to see you in the Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And that demonstrates the very real need to have a relevant platform that is appropriate to the learning particular subject at hand, and that the teacher is comfortable with, and that obviously creates a sort of level of interactivity. So thank you very much for that, and I hope you all, as you say, we'll have more questions in the Q&A. So over to Pamela then, for our final, but no means least, presenter. Please, over to you, Pamela. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I'm going to cut this a little short because I know that we're all really eager to go into our breakout rooms. but I'll share with you the two most important lessons I've learned over the past several months. And the first is that traditional approaches to professional development have not served us well. They have been inadequate, and they failed to prepare us for the challenges today and possibly ahead. And the second is that in the process of integrating technology into the educational experience, most teachers need to improve their assessment skills in both traditional assessments and in more project-oriented assessments. So let me go back to that professional development point I was going to make. So in my work as a consultant, I work with teachers in both K-12 and in universities, and I've seen that teachers at institutions that had robust professional development programs in place fared much better than those that did not. So the teachers at institutions with strong PD programs already knew how to use their learning management system. They already knew how to create a game or a quiz. They already knew how to create an assignment, and they already knew, at least most of the time, how to create a project and assess it. And institutions that had a more ad hoc approach to professional development were in this situation in March where it was like, quick, what's going to be our learning management? Hurry. How are we going to use, or how are we going to train our teachers how to use the learning management system? And so that was, there were lots of institutions that were essentially starting from zero. And so of course that's not where we want to be. So in terms of what type of learning would a robust professional development program include? Well, I think today teachers need to learn more about instructional design and assessment. And so I hope that this view from around the region has been helpful and informative for you. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much. I think you've really hit on a critical issue, which is something Karl was talking about being honest. And it's the fact that actually we need to look and reflect about our teaching practice, our approach to assessment, our approach to constructing material design. Technology doesn't answer the problems, it doesn't solve the problems, it often highlights those that were pre-existing. I think this is a real opportunity for the education sector at all ages to really think deeply about what's important, and put the learner at the center, think about learning, think about teacher needs, well-being, development training, and really make the educational sector a lot stronger. So thank you very much, Pamela, and thank you to all of our speakers. That was a fantastic session. I'll hand over to Tendai now, perhaps just to take us through to the next steps, but thank you very much indeed to everybody.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you to all of the speakers. That was incredibly insightful. I learned so much during these sessions, and I'm sure so have the attendees. Now, the webinar isn't completely over. We're now going to go to the breakout rooms for a Q&A. So we're going to be in small groups. Please, for those of you in the attendance, the audience, please feel free to introduce yourself, share your experiences of teaching online and your thoughts and your excitement and what you're thinking about online learning and blended learning moving forward. If you have any concerns and challenges and questions for us, please pose them, and we hope there'll be some lively discussions there. Let's try to limit the time though to, let's say 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So we're not going too late to keep everybody, and I'm sure you've got things to this evening. So thank you very much again. Really enjoyed the webinar. Thank you so much to the speakers. Thank you, Dr. Chris, for helping with this. And someone behind the scenes who you may not be aware of, Danielle. Thank you very much, Danielle, for helping making this event possible. So bye for now, and we'll see you soon.